Daniel was no stranger to solo camping. He loved the isolation, the escape from city life. This time, he had chosen an old-growth forest, miles from the nearest road, where the wind carried the scent of pine and the air hummed with the calls of distant creatures. The first day was peaceful. He hiked, fished, and set up camp beside a quiet lake. As the sun set, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees. It was comforting, until it wasn't. That night, as he sat by the fire, the breeze turned restless, swirling through the trees. The flames flickered, the leaves rustled, and then a voice, faint, hidden within the wind. Daniel frowned, straining to listen. It was probably just the air playing tricks, the way wind through the branches can mimic words. But then he heard again, a breathy murmur, just on the edge of understanding. Not the wind. Something in the wind. Daniel stood, scanning the dark tree line. His flashlight cut through the void, illuminating nothing but swaying branches. The voice had stopped. The wind had returned to its normal song. He shook his head. Just my imagination. But as he turned back to his tent, a whisper right behind him. He spun, heart hammering. Nothing. Just empty air. But the whispering wind was laughing now. Sleep was impossible. The wind never died down, and with every gust, the whispers came. Soft, insistent. They weren't words. Not at first. Just hushed tones, rising and falling like a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. But then, his name, Daniel. He sat bolt upright, the tent fabric fluttering around him. No, I didn't hear that. I couldn't have. Then again, Daniel, a breath against his ear. Inside the tent, Daniel scrambled for his flashlight, flicking it on. The tent's interior was empty. The entrance flap was still zipped shut. The wind outside roared, but inside, the whispers had stopped. He exhaled, gripping the light so tightly his fingers ached. I need to go. But before he could move, the wind died. The forest was silent. Too silent. No wind. No leaves rustling. No distant owl calls. Just silence. And then, a hand pressed against the outside of the tent. The fabric bowed inward, a distinct palm shape imprinting just beside Daniel's head. Not a tree branch. Not an animal. A hand. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't move. The hand slid downward. Slow. Deliberate. Tracing the fabric like it could see him. And then it was gone. The wind roared back to life, and with it, the whispers returned, louder. Mocking. Laughing. Daniel didn't waste another second. He tore open the tent flap and bolted for his car, not caring about his gear, not caring about the branches scratching at his arms as he ran. The whispers chased him, swirling around his head, weaving through the trees. They weren't saying his name anymore. They were saying one thing over and over. Come back. He never did. Daniel doesn't camp alone anymore. He doesn't stray too far from civilization. But even in the city, on certain windy nights, when the air moves just right, he swears he can still hear it. A whisper in the wind, calling his name. Sleep well, if you can. Ryan had camped here before. The clearing was perfect, far enough from the main trails to avoid other hikers, close enough to a small river for water. A place of peace, or so he thought. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, Ryan felt it, the weight of unseen eyes, the feeling that something was just there beyond the firelight. He told himself it was nothing, just paranoia. Then he looked up, and he saw him. A figure stood at the tree line, not moving, not shifting, just standing. Ryan's breath hitched. His first thought was that it was another camper, maybe a lost hiker. But no one called out. No one waved. The figure just stood there, motionless. The fire's glow barely reached it, but he could see the outline, tall, thin, arms at its sides. Waiting, watching. Ryan forced a laugh, shaking his head. It's a tree, just a weirdly shaped tree. But deep down, he knew better. He turned his back to the fire, trying to ignore the unease crawling up his spine. Maybe if he didn't acknowledge it, it would go away. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. The wind shifted. And yet, something felt wrong. Slowly, cautiously, Ryan glanced over his shoulder. The figure was still there. Same spot. Same stance. Unmoving. Unblinking. It should have been a relief. It's not getting closer. But somehow that was worse. Because that meant it wanted him to see it. Ryan's pulse pounded. His rational mind scrambled for explanations. A shadow? A trick of the firelight? He picked up his flashlight, took a breath, and aimed it directly at the figure. The beam cut through the darkness and hit nothing. The space where the figure had been was empty. No tree, no person, just empty, swaying branches. Ryan swallowed hard. Okay, I'm losing it. He turned off the flashlight, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The figure was back, standing exactly where it had been before. Ryan's mouth went dry. He couldn't explain it. He didn't want to. He forced himself to move, poking at the fire, pretending he wasn't afraid, pretending this wasn't happening. Don't acknowledge it. Don't let it know you see it. But how could he ignore it? A presence just at the edge of reality, standing, waiting. It didn't move closer, didn't make a sound. It just watched. The hours dragged. He wanted to run, to break camp, to flee into the night. But the thought of turning his back on the tree line, on it, was unbearable. So he sat and waited and watched until exhaustion won. His eyes grew heavy, the fire burned low, and the night swallowed everything. Birdsong woke him. Sunlight streamed through the trees. The air was warm, calm, normal. Ryan let out a shaky breath. Just my imagination. Just a trick of the dark. He forced himself to check the tree line. The spot where the figure had stood was empty, just as it had been in the flashlight's beam. A sigh of relief, until he turned back to his fire pit and saw the footprints, leading from where the figure had stood, stopping just behind his chair. They weren't supposed to be here. At least, that's what the old man at the general store had told them. The spot they had chosen, deep in the woods, wasn't marked on any maps. It wasn't a designated campsite. Best to stick to the trails, the old man had warned. People get lost out there, or worse. But they had laughed it off. Ghost stories, old superstitions, nothing more. That was before the footsteps. The fire had burned low. The four of them, Mark, Sarah, Dave, and Emily, were bundled inside the tent, their laughter dying down as exhaustion set in. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl echoing in the night. Then, a sound, faint but unmistakable. Crunch. A footstep. Mark's eyes snapped open. He held his breath, listening. Silence. Had he imagined it? The mind plays tricks in the dark. He closed his eyes again. Crunch. This time, he knew he hadn't imagined it. He nudged Sarah beside him. Did you hear that? Before she could answer. Crunch. A slow, deliberate step just outside the tent. Then another, and another. Emily whispered, "Is that an animal?" No one answered. They all knew the truth. These weren't the erratic, darting sounds of a raccoon or deer. These were footsteps. Slow, intentional, circling them. Mark reached for the flashlight, his fingers trembling. Dave held up a hand. Wait. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, from the opposite side of the tent, crunch. The steps had moved. It was going around them, step by step, testing the perimeter. Sarah squeezed Mark's arm. "Say something," she mouthed. Mark swallowed hard and cleared his throat. "Hello." No response. The footsteps stopped again. The night stretched, painfully still. Then, closer this time, crunch, right outside the thin layer of fabric. Mark flicked on a flashlight and aimed it at the tent wall. Nothing. No shadow. No movement. Just silence. A breath. Soft. Just inches from where Mark sat. Then, a whisper. Not words. Not quite. Just the sound of something trying to speak. A shiver ran through him. He gripped the flashlight tighter, his breath coming fast and shallow. And then, the zipper of the tent shifted. Not yanked. Not pulled open. Just tested. Like something was deciding whether or not to come inside. Dave shot up, grabbing the camping knife. "We have to go." But no one moved, because the footsteps had started again. Faster this time. More erratic. Moving around them in unpredictable patterns. Circling. 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 The whispering grew louder, carried on the wind, as if the very trees were joining in. Then, silence. And in that silence, a single, slow breath. Right behind them. Mark didn't think. He acted. He unzipped the tent in one violent motion and lunged out, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No signs of anything or anyone having been there. Behind him, the others scrambled out, eyes wild with fear. The forest was empty, but the feeling remained. The feeling of being watched. The feeling that something had been there. And worse, that it still was. They packed up in minutes, leaving everything behind. As they sped down the dirt road, Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. The tree line stood still, silent, undisturbed. And yet, for just a second, he swore he saw something standing between the trees. Not moving, not chasing, just watching, waiting. Jake had been hiking these woods for years. He knew the trails like the back of his hand, had spent countless nights under the stars. But today felt different. The air was thick, almost too quiet. Even the usual distant calls of birds and rustling of small animals were absent. The only sound was his own boots crunching on the dirt path. That's when he smelled it. Smoke, not the lingering scent of an old fire. Fresh smoke. Something was still burning. Jake followed the scent, veering slightly off the trail. It wasn't long before he saw it. A small clearing, a campsite nestled between the trees. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A tent stood zipped up. A few folding chairs circled a smoldering fire pit. But then his eyes locked onto the pot over the fire. Soup, still bubbling. Beside it, a tin cup of coffee, steam curling into the cool air. Jake frowned. He took a cautious step forward. Hello. No answer. He called out again, louder. Hey, anyone here? Silence. The only thing moving was the slow drift of steam from the forgotten meal. Something was wrong. Jake walked around the campsite, his skin crawling with unease. A backpack lay unzipped near the tent, clothes and supplies spilling out as if someone had been in the middle of unpacking. A lantern sat on a tree stump, still turned on. And yet no people. It was as if they had just vanished. His gaze drifted back to the tent. He hesitated, then knelt, fingers gripping the zipper. Slowly, he pulled it down. The inside was tidy. Sleeping bags, neatly arranged. A flashlight. A book left open as if someone had been in the middle of reading. Jake swallowed. Where the hell did they go? He circled the area, searching for tracks, signs of movement. There were footprints, several sets leading into the campsite, but none leading out. His breath hitched. That didn't make sense. He checked again, convinced he hadn't missed something. Nothing. It was as if they had walked into this place and never walked out. Then he saw something else. Near the edge of the clearing, where the grass met the dense tree line. A single shoe. Small, like it belonged to a woman. It lay on its side, the laces untied. Beyond it, the underbrush was disturbed, branches bent and broken as if something had moved through. Or someone. Jake's gut told him to leave. He wasn't supposed to be here. Whatever had happened wasn't meant for him to witness. And yet, something compelled him to stay. A rustle in the trees made him spin around. Nothing. But then, a whisper. Faint. Carried by the wind. His pulse pounded. Hello. No response. Just the whisper. A fragmented, broken sound. Almost like a voice. Almost like words. But not quite. He backed away, forcing his legs to move, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But before he turned fully, he took one last glance at the campsite. The fire had gone out. The coffee cup was empty. The soup was cold. Jake's stomach twisted. He had been standing here for only minutes. The fire had been burning. The food had been hot. But now, it was as if no one had been here for hours. Maybe even longer. Jake didn't waste another second. He bolted, crashing back through the woods, following the trail without looking back. His heart pounded, breath ragged. The trees closed in around him. The whispers grew louder. And then, silence. The next thing he knew, he was back at his car, standing beside it, gripping the door handle so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He didn't remember running the last stretch. Didn't remember getting here. But he was here, and the woods behind him were as still as death. Jake reported the abandoned campsite to the rangers. They investigated. Asked him questions. Checked the site. They found nothing. No tent. No fire pit. No signs that anyone had ever been there at all. Jake didn't go back. Didn't ask questions. Didn't try to explain it. Because deep down he knew whatever had happened to those campers, it hadn't just made them disappear. It had erased them. For Daniel and his friends, the camping trip was supposed to be a fun getaway. A long weekend in the mountains, far from the city, with nothing but their tents, a bonfire, and the endless wilderness around them. But that first night, as they sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows and trading stories, something changed. It started with a feeling, a sensation that made the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. He wasn't the only one who felt it. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? Sarah asked, poking at the fire. Come on, Chris scoffed. You're just scaring yourself. But as the words left his mouth, Emily's breath hitched. Guys, over there. She pointed beyond the firelight, past the trees, where the forest melted into blackness. Two pinpricks of light gleamed from the darkness. Low to the ground, too high for an animal, too steady for fireflies. Eyes, watching them, unmoving. Maybe it's a deer, Chris offered, but his voice lacked confidence. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and aimed it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating empty branches, dense underbrush. But the eyes were gone. Emily let out a breath. That was creepy. They laughed it off, convinced it was nothing. But as they settled back into their seats, the unease lingered. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Daniel stood up to grab more wood. He turned toward the tree lean and froze. The eyes were back, closer. They stared at him, unblinking, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He couldn't see a body, no outline of an animal, just the eyes. Do you guys see that? He whispered. One by one, they turned, and saw it too. This time, no one laughed. Chris grabbed a rock and hurled it toward the eyes. It disappeared into the trees with a rustle of leaves. The eyes didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't blink. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm. Let's go inside the tent. He nodded, stepping backward. But as he did, the eyes shifted. They weren't closer. They were higher, as if whatever owned them had just stood up. The group rushed inside the tent, zipping it shut, their breaths ragged. For a long time, silence stretched between them, only the distant crackling of the dying fire keeping them grounded. Then softly, crunch, a single step, outside, then another. The footsteps stopped just beyond the tent. No one moved. No one breathed. A long, unbearable silence. Then, a rustling sound, the slow drag of something against the fabric of the tent. A deep, slow exhale just inches away. Chris gripped the camping knife, his knuckles white. Daniel reached for the flashlight. And then, silence again, for what felt like hours. None of them slept. By dawn, the fear had settled into exhaustion, and as the first light broke through the trees, Daniel forced himself to step outside. The campsite was just as they had left it. No footprints, no sign of anything. But as the sunlight touched the trees, something caught his eye. High up, on the bark of a tree facing their tent. Two deep scratches, long and deliberate, as if something had been watching, waiting, and marking its place. It started as a joke. Ben and his friends had been camping in the deep woods for 2 nights already, enjoying the peace that came with being miles away from civilization. The fire crackled, their laughter echoed through the trees, and the only thing on their minds was how many marshmallows they could roast before the flames died down. That's when Ben had an idea. He stood, cupped his hands around his mouth, and called into the darkness beyond the firelight. Hello. His voice carried through the trees, swallowed quickly by the night. Silence. The others chuckled. Spooky, Jenna teased, tossing another log onto the fire. Ben grinned, about to sit back down, when the forest whispered back. Hello. The word came from the trees. The same pitch, the same tone. An exact replica of Ben's voice. The laughter died instantly. The group exchanged nervous glances. Probably just an echo, Chris muttered, though his voice wavered. Ben hesitated. He knew how echoes worked. This wasn't one. Still, He forced a chuckle and tried again. Who's there? Silence. Then, a beat later. Who's there? The same voice. The same cadence. As if the forest was playing along. Only this time, it was closer. A chill ran down Ben's spine. The sound hadn't bounced off the trees. It had come from them. Jenna grabbed his arm. Okay, stop messing around. I'm not, he whispered. They listened, waiting. Nothing. Then, crunch. A single footstep in the darkness. Then another. Not approaching. Circling. Chris grabbed the flashlight, hands shaking as he flicked it on and aimed it into the trees. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the trunks, the branches, the empty space between. And then they saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the light's reach. Motionless. Watching. And then, who's there? It said it again. But this time, the voice was wrong. Still Ben's voice. But slower. Stretched. Distorted. Like something was learning. Get in the tent. Jenna's voice was barely above a whisper, but they all scrambled backward, unzipping the tent and piling inside. Chris yanked the zipper shut, his breathing ragged. Outside, silence. Then, get in the tent. The same words, spoken in Jenna's voice. A perfect imitation. A terrible mockery. No one spoke. No one dare move. The fire outside crackled, casting faint shadows against the fabric of the tent. Every second felt like an hour. Then, ever so faintly, the sound of something breathing, just beyond the tent wall. Slow, shallow, listening. They held their breath, waiting for it to pass. But it didn't. Instead, a single, long fingernail traced along the outside of the tent. A slow, deliberate drag. Then a whisper. Hello. Ben clenched his jaw. It was his voice again. Dawn took its time arriving. When the first golden light bled through the trees, they didn't waste a second. Unzipping the tent, they grabbed their things and ran. They didn't look back, didn't stop to pack. They only stopped once they saw the familiar dirt road where their car was parked. Heart pounding, Ben dared one last glance at the tree line. Nothing. No figures. No eyes. No footsteps following. But as he opened the car door, something made him freeze. On the edge of the woods, just visible through the shifting morning mist. A single, long scratch on a tree trunk. And next to it, his own name. Mark, Lisa, and Kevin had been hiking all day. By the time they set up camp, exhaustion weighed heavy on them. The fire crackled as they sat around it, laughing, telling stories, letting the sounds of the forest lull them into comfort. A distant owl hooted. A soft breeze rustled the trees. The woods felt safe, until the first noise came. A deep, heavy thud echoed from the darkness beyond their campsite. Not a twig snapping, not leaves rustling. Something heavy, solid. The laughter stopped. Kevin turned toward the trees. That was big. Probably just a deer, Lisa said, but even she sounded unsure. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Then, another step, closer this time. Mark grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the noise. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating trees, underbrush, nothing else. But something was out there. They could feel it, watching, listening. Lisa forced a chuckle. Let's just get in the tent. If it's an animal, it'll leave us alone. The others agreed. They zipped up the tent, cocooning themselves inside. The fire outside burned low, flickering shadows against the thin fabric. Silence stretched. Then, thud, right outside the tent. Lisa squeezed Kevin's arm. No one moved. Another step, then another. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't sniffing, wasn't scurrying. It was walking, a massive shape shifting outside the fabric. A deep, dragging breath, low and guttural, sent a shiver down Mark's spine. And then, it leaned against the tent. The fabric pressed inward. Something was right there. Kevin gasped. Lisa clapped a hand over his mouth. The weight shifted. Then silence. They didn't sleep. They stayed frozen, waiting for the first light of dawn. When the sun finally rose, Mark was the first to move. Slowly, he unzipped the tent and peered outside. The campsite was undisturbed. The fire had burned down to embers. The trees swayed peacefully in the morning breeze. No broken branches, no disturbed dirt, no footprints, Nothing. But something had been there. Something massive. Something watching. Something that left no trace. Ethan had camped by the lake before. It was peaceful, isolated, and offered the kind of quiet he needed after the stress of city life. This time was no different. The lake was still, moonlight rippling over the surface, reflecting the tall pines that surrounded the shore. The air was cool, the scent of damp earth and water filling his lungs as he settled into his tent. A perfect night, until the sobbing began. It was faint at first, a soft, broken cry drifting across the water. Ethan sat up, his pulse quickening. He unzipped his tent just enough to listen, the cold air creeping in. The sobbing was unmistakable now. A woman's voice, choked with sorrow, coming from the lake. His mind raced. Had someone fallen in? Was someone hurt? Grabbing his flashlight, he stepped out, scanning the shoreline. Nothing. The water was smooth, undisturbed. But the crying continued, and now it sounded closer. Ethan's breath came fast. He swung the flashlight across the trees, the lake, the rocky shore. Still nothing. "Hello," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. The sobbing stopped. Silence pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. Then, a single ripple spread across the lake. A disturbance. Small, but deliberate, as if something had just slipped beneath the surface. Ethan's stomach knotted. He stepped back toward his tent, every nerve in his body screaming at him to leave. Then, a voice, right behind him. "Help me." Soft, desperate, right at his ear. Ethan whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. No one, only the lake. The hair on his neck stood on end. He didn't know why, but he felt watched. Then a sound, a wet, shuffling noise. His light swept downward, stopping on something that made his stomach lurch. A trail of wet footprints, leading from the lake to his tent. Ethan stumbled back, his mind screaming that this wasn't possible. No one had been there. He had just checked. And yet, the footprints glistened in the pale moonlight, soaking into the dirt, proof of something unnatural. He took another step and felt something cold brush against his arm. Like fingertips. That was enough. He grabbed his gear, stuffed it into his pack without care, and sprinted toward his car. He didn't look back, didn't stop, didn't listen, not even when the sobbing started again. This time, coming from right beside him. Ethan didn't breathe until his car roared to life, headlights cutting through the trees. He sped down the winding dirt road, his heart hammering. He told himself he imagined it, that the mind plays tricks in the dark. But just as the lake disappeared from view, he risked one last glance in the rearview mirror. And there, standing at the water's edge, barely illuminated by the moon, a woman, dripping wet, watching him leave. Daniel had been hiking alone for hours. What was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway had turned into a nightmare when he lost the trail. His map was useless, his phone had no signal, and the sun was sinking behind the trees. Panic crept in. He needed shelter, needed warmth. And then he saw it. A cabin, right there in the middle of nowhere. Perfectly intact. Windows glowing softly from within. No smoke from a chimney. No signs of a road or a path or any reason for it to be there. But at that moment, he didn't care. He ran toward it. The door creaked open before he even touched it. Inside, the cabin was pristine. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, though no logs fed its flames. A chair sat in front of it, rocking slightly, as if someone had just been there. The table was set for one. A steaming bowl of soup sat in the center, untouched. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't right. "Hello," he called, but his voice barely carried past the walls. Silence. Then, a soft click behind him. The door had shut. Daniel swallowed hard, his breath shallow. He turned back to the door, hand trembling as he reached for the knob. It wouldn't budge. Something in the air had changed. The warmth of the cabin felt artificial. The fire didn't crackle. The soup didn't steam anymore, and the rocking chair had stopped moving. His skin prickled. Then, from the corner of the room, a sound. A whisper. Too soft to make out, but unmistakably there. Daniel turned toward the nearest window, hoping to break through. But what he saw made his stomach drop. Outside, the forest was gone. The window didn't show trees or the night sky. Instead, it looked into another room. The same room he was standing in. The same fire. The same table. The same chair. And in that reflection of the cabin, someone was standing behind him. Daniel spun around, heart slamming against his ribs. No one was there. His own reflection stared back at him from the window, wide-eyed, breathless. And then, the reflection blinked. He hadn't. That was it. Adrenaline surged through him as he slammed his shoulder against the door, over and over, ignoring the pain until... Crack! The door burst open, and he stumbled outside, into darkness. The cabin was gone. Only the empty forest remained. Daniel didn't stop running until he saw headlights in the distance. A ranger found him on the side of a dirt road, exhausted, trembling. When he told him about the cabin, the ranger frowned. "There's nothing out there," he said. "No cabins. No structures. Nothing but trees." Daniel insisted. He could still feel the warmth of the fire on his skin, smell the soup, hear the whisper, but there was no proof it had ever been there. And yet, when Daniel emptied his pockets that night, something small and smooth tumbled out onto the floor. A key, old, rusted, and on the metal, barely legible, were 3 words etched into its surface. "Come back soon." Mike and Jason had been camping together since college. They knew the woods, knew how to build a fire, and knew how to tell a good scary story under the stars. That night had been no different. They had set up camp in a quiet clearing, the fire crackling between them as they laughed and shared drinks. The last thing either of them remembered was the fire burning bright, their conversation drifting into drowsy silence. Then, nothing. No dreams. No sense of time passing. Just blackness. Until they woke up. Jason was the first to stir. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, but something felt off. His body was stiff, like he had been lying in the same position for hours. Then he noticed the fire. It was gone. Not dying embers, not smoldering logs, just ash. Cold, white ash, as if the fire had burned itself out long ago. His stomach nodded. That didn't make sense. The fire had been strong when he and Mike had last spoken. Mike groaned, sitting up beside him, looking just as confused. "What time is it?" Jason grabbed his phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, showing a time that made his breath hitch. 4:13 nachts. Jason's heart pounded. The last time he had checked his phone, it had been 10:05 p.m. 6 hours. Just gone. Mike checked his watch. Same time. Same missing hours. Neither of them had any memory of falling asleep. No recollection of putting out the fire. No warning. Just a sudden cut in time. Jason's mind raced. Had they been drugged? Exposed to something toxic? But their water bottles were sealed, their gear untouched. And then Mike pointed to something that sent chills up Jason's spine. Footprints. A ring of footprints surrounded their campsite. But they weren't their footprints. Too many. Too erratic. Some pressed deep into the soil, others light as if whoever, or whatever, made them had barely touched the ground. Jason stood, his breath sharp in the cold air. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just the empty woods. But a terrible thought gnawed at the back of his mind. Had they been alone all night? Mike grabbed his backpack, digging through it with shaky hands. He stopped, his face going pale. "Dude, my knife is missing." Jason checked his own gear. Everything seemed in place, until he reached for his car keys. They weren't there. His heart pounded. No. I always keep them in the same pocket. They tore through their packs, their tent, even the cold fire pit, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Then, a metallic clink. Mike froze, pointing just past the tree line. There, Jason's stomach dropped. His keys, dangling from a low-hanging branch, 50 feet away. Neither of them moved. The forest was silent, the usual sounds of insects and rustling leaves completely absent. Jason swallowed hard. "We need to go. Now." They grabbed their gear in frantic silence, stuffing everything into their packs without care. As they worked, Mike's hand brushed against something odd in the dirt. A small charred watch. It wasn't his. It wasn't Jason's. And when he picked it up, the hands on the clock weren't moving. Instead, they were ticking backward. Mike dropped it instantly, his face twisted in horror. "We're leaving." They sprinted to the car, not daring to look back. Jason jammed the key into the ignition with trembling fingers. As the engine roared to life, he cast one last glance in the rearview mirror. And that's when he saw them. Tall, motionless figures standing just beyond the fire pit, watching. Then, the headlights flickered, and they were gone. Mike and Jason never figured out what happened that night. Their memories never returned. No strange markings on their bodies, no signs of injury. Just 6 hours of darkness, and the unsettling feeling that they hadn't been alone. When they returned weeks later, the campsite looked untouched. No footprints, no signs of the fire. But in the center of the clearing, resting in the dirt, was the watch, still ticking, still running backward. Chris had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A solo camping weekend. Just him, the wilderness, and the quiet peace of nature. No stress, no distractions, just isolation. The first day went smoothly, setting up camp, gathering firewood, cooking over the flames. As night fell, he crawled into his tent, zipped the entrance shut, and stretched out on his sleeping bag, listening to the distant hoots of owls and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. It was peaceful, at least for a while. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Chris stirred awake. Something felt wrong. The air inside the tent was colder than before. The wind outside had died completely. But what truly sent shivers down his spine was the shadow, a tall, dark silhouette stretched across the fabric of his tent. His breath caught in his throat. It was standing right by the entrance, motionless, completely still. Chris's mind raced. Was it an animal? Another camper? A person? But how had they gotten so close without making a sound? Then, the shadow moved. Not outside the tent, but inside. Chris sat up, so fast his head nearly hit the tent's ceiling. His hands scrambled for his flashlight, heart hammering in his chest. He clicked it on. The tent was empty. No one was there. His breath came in shallow bursts. He swept the beam of light around the small space, half expecting someone, or something, to be crouched in the corner, waiting. Nothing. He exhaled a shaky laugh, rubbing his temples. Maybe he had been dreaming. Maybe it was just the firelight outside playing tricks on the tent fabric. Yeah, that had to be it. But just as he was about to turn off the flashlight, the shadow returned. Chris froze, the blood draining from his face. The shadow was there again, tall, featureless, looming, but this time it wasn't by the entrance. It was directly behind him. His throat tightened. He felt the weight of unseen eyes boring into him. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out, but his body wouldn't move. The tent walls seemed to close in. Then, a whisper, low, unintelligible, right behind his ear. Chris bolted. He scrambled for the zipper, hands shaking violently as he yanked it down. The second the opening was wide enough, he threw himself outside, gasping for air. The night was eerily silent. The fire had burned down to smoldering embers. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and empty. Chris spun back to the tent, expecting to see something. But it stood there, still and undisturbed, its fabric rippling softly in the breeze. No shadow, no sign of movement, just an empty tent, as if he had imagined it all. Chris didn't go back inside. He spent the rest of the night sitting by the dying fire, clutching his flashlight, eyes locked on the tent, waiting for something, anything, to happen again. Nothing did. When the sun finally rose, he packed up his gear in record time, stuffing the tent into his backpack without daring to open it again. As he started down the trail, a gnawing thought settled in his mind. Had he really been alone that night? Or was something still in the tent, watching him leave? Tom and Rachel were experienced campers. They had hiked deep into the wilderness, setting up camp miles from a nearest road, eager for a weekend of solitude. That night, they sat by the fire, enjoying the warm glow as the night stretched around them. The sounds of the forest were alive, the hoots of owls, the chirp of insects, the rustling of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. The world was full of sound, until it wasn't. Tom was the first to notice. He had been poking at the fire when something shifted in the air. A strange pressure, a sudden stillness. Rachel frowned, tilting her head. "Do you hear that?" Tom swallowed hard. That was the problem. There was nothing to hear. The usual symphony of a night had vanished. No crickets, no birds, no rustling of leaves. The air had become oppressively still, as if the entire forest had been muted. Even the fire, though still flickering, seemed eerily quiet. The flames licked at the wood, but there was no crackling, no popping. Just a thick, suffocating silence. Tom reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The trees stood tall and lifeless, their leaves frozen mid-sway, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Rachel gripped his arm, whispering, "This isn't normal." And then, just beyond the firelight, a single crack, a footstep. Tom swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing but trees. A second footstep, closer this time. Still nothing. Rachel grabbed his wrist. "We need to go." But something in Tom's gut told him they weren't going anywhere, because something was already here. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural pressure. Rachel's breathing was shallow, her fingers digging into Tom's sleeve. Then, a whisper, soft, just behind them. But when they turned, nothing. And then something moved. Not with sound, not with footsteps, but the trees swayed, bending away from something unseen, as if recoiling in fear. The silence deepened, so absolute that it felt like the world itself had stopped existing. Tom could feel his heartbeat hammering in his chest, but even it seemed muffled, as if the silence was swallowing the sound. And then the fire went out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Rachel gasped. Tom fumbled for the flashlight, his shaking hands barely gripping it as he flicked it back on. But now, the trees around them were closer. They hadn't moved. They couldn't have. And yet, the clearing felt smaller. The trunks loomed, their gnarled bark stretching inward, as if they were leaning in to listen. Rachel grabbed Tom's wrist. Run. They didn't pack, didn't grab their gear. They just ran. Branches clawed at them as they bolted through the woods, their footsteps deafening against the unnatural quiet. The world had lost its sound, yet somehow their breath and pounding feet echoed too loudly, as if something was letting them hear it, as if the silence had a choice. They ran until they reached the car, throwing themselves inside. Tom jammed the keys into the ignition with trembling hands. The engine roared to life, and at that moment, the sound returned. Crickets chirped. The wind rustled through the trees. An owl hooted in the distance. The silence was gone. The world had gone back to normal. Rachel looked at Tom, her face pale and drenched in sweat. What the hell was that? Tom didn't answer. He was too busy staring in the rearview mirror, because in the darkness of the trees, just beyond the reach of the headlights, the trees were still bent, as if something had been standing there, watching, listening, and now it was gone. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. For friends, Josh, Amanda, Tyler, and Mia, hiking deep into the woods, far from the noise of civilization. They set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees, the kind that had stood for centuries, their branches twisting high into the sky. As night fell, they sat around the fire, trading stories and laughter, unaware that something had already noticed them. Tyler was the first to sense it. The laughter had faded, and the only sounds were the crackling fire and the whisper of wind through the leaves. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp. Something fell off. Then, Mia broke the silence. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Josh scoffed, tossing a twig into the fire. "By what? A squirrel?" But Amanda wasn't laughing. She was staring up at the treetops, her face pale. "Guys, there's something in the trees." The group followed Amanda's gaze. High above, nestled among the thick branches, something was staring down at them. It was hard to make out, just a dark shape, unmoving. At first, they thought it was an owl or maybe a raccoon. But then, it blinked. Two large, reflective eyes, like polished glass, caught the firelight and gleamed down at them. It wasn't an animal. It was watching. Mia shuddered. What is that? Josh grabbed his flashlight and aimed it at the figure. But the second the beam of light hit the branches, it moved. A sudden, swift motion, too fast, too smooth. The branches barely rustled as the figure disappeared, shifting to another tree like a shadow, slipping between cracks. Tyler cursed under his breath. Nope, nope, I'm out. We're leaving. Amanda shook her head, gripping his arm. We can't hike back in the dark. Let's just stay close to the fire. The group huddled together, their eyes flicking back to the trees. But the watcher was gone. Or worse, it was still there, and they just couldn't see it anymore. Hours passed. No one spoke. No one slept. Every so often, there was a faint rustle above them. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something moving. At one point, Tyler swore he saw something long and thin. An arm? A leg extend from the canopy before vanishing into the darkness. The fire burned lower, casting flickering shadows across the forest floor. The night stretched on, thick with an unshakable dread. And then, a branch snapped directly above them. Mia screamed. Josh grabbed a burning stick from the fire, waving it wildly at the treetops. Stay away. For a moment, silence. Then a blur of movement. A shadow, impossibly fast, leaping from tree to tree, circling the clearing. A deep, guttural, clicking sound echoed from above like something thinking. That was enough. The group grabbed their essentials and ran. Branches tore at their clothes, roots threatened to trip them, but they didn't stop. They didn't dare look up. Behind them, they could hear the shifting branches. It was following. It had been watching them all night. And now it was hunting. They ran until they reached their car, throwing themselves inside, locking the doors. Tyler fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The engine roared to life. Headlights flooded the road. And for just a second, they saw it, perched on a tree branch, just at the edge of the light. Not an animal, not a person. Something wrong. Long limbs, twisted joints, eyes that gleamed like wet stone. And as they sped away, leaving the forest behind, Mia whispered what they had all been thinking. It let us go.